I stood in the back of the ballroom, clapping like everyone else, invisible to the man basking in the spotlight. Alan Ford, now hailed as a visionary CEO, was receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award. He smiled like he owned the world, thanked his board, his late mentor, even Cynthia, my former best friend. Not one word about me. I was the one who built his empire beside him, brick by brick. I'd sacrificed my health, my career, even my family, to make sure he succeeded. And now, I didn't even exist in his story. The audience rose in a standing ovation. I remained still, cold. In that moment, a strange calm came over me. Not sadness, not rage, clarity. That was the night I died inside. But death has its uses, because sometimes you have to be completely broken to begin again. And this time, I wouldn't rise for him. I'd rise for me. We met when Alan was broke, working shifts at a gas station while pretending to run a startup on the side. I was the steady one, an accountant with a real job, real savings, and real dreams for our future. He talked big, full of wild ideas and charisma, and I fell hard. When we moved in together, I paid the bills. When he had meetings, I prepped his pitch decks, sometimes staying up all night to make them perfect. I didn't mind. I believed in him more than he believed in himself. "I'll take you to the stars one day," he'd whisper as I rubbed his back after another rejection. I thought we were partners. I didn't realize then that, to Alan, I was just a launch pad, meant to be left behind the moment he touched orbit, and when he did, he made sure I'd never follow. The first time I should have seen it was when he landed his first investor, thanks to a connection I handed him. My uncle, a respected venture capitalist, reluctantly agreed to meet Alan after I begged him for weeks. I coached Alan through every word and even wrote the proposal myself. When he secured the funding, he smiled, kissed me, and then said, "You're the best assistant a guy could ask for." Assistant, not partner, not co-founder. I laughed it off. Maybe he was just nervous, right? But the more success he tasted, the more I shrank in his shadow. My name was never on the website, never on the credits. I told myself titles didn't matter, but respect does. And Alan, he made it clear I was just the woman who cheered from the sidelines. Nothing more. The changes were subtle at first. He started coming home later, always too tired to talk. He'd ignore my ideas, only to repeat them in meetings as if they were his own. He picked at my clothes, my weight, told me I was too ordinary to understand business. I remember once, after I spent days organizing a fundraiser for his company's launch, he told me not to attend. You wouldn't fit in with the crowd. I cried in the shower that night, so he wouldn't hear, but I still ironed his shirt for the event. That's how far I'd fallen, trying to prove my worth to a man who had already decided I was expendable. The man I loved was vanishing, and in his place stood a stranger with my loyalty and none of my love. I'll never forget the night I caught him cheating. I had stayed late at work, then dropped by his office to surprise him with dinner. His assistant tried to stop me, panicked, flustered, but I walked in anyway, and there she was, Cynthia, my best friend since college, her lipstick smeared, her blouse unbuttoned, and Alan's hand on her thigh. They froze like statues. I stood there holding 2 containers of Thai food and a bottle of wine. Watching the world, I built collapse. Cynthia had the audacity to say, "It's not what it looks like." Alan didn't even flinch. He just said, "You shouldn't have come." No apology, no shame. I walked out without a word, took a cab home, and threw up everything inside me: food, hope, and the last shreds of my trust. The divorce was public and brutal. Alan painted me as unstable, greedy, even disloyal. He had Cynthia by his side during interviews, claiming she helped rescue him from a toxic marriage. I was blacklisted in our shared circles. Friends stopped calling. My name was scrubbed from every corner of his company. I got nothing, not even the apartment I decorated. He had better lawyers, better PR, and zero conscience. I moved into a dingy studio with peeling walls, ate instant noodles, and walked to work because I couldn't afford gas. No one cared. The woman who once saved Alan Ford was now a ghost. I lost weight. I stopped speaking unless necessary. I forgot what it felt like to be touched with kindness. And then, one rainy night, I took a turn too fast on a freeway. The world went black. I woke up gasping for air, heart pounding, in a familiar room. But something was off. The curtains were different. My phone buzzed, and I stared at the date. 3 years earlier. The year Alan got his first big break. The year I still believed in him. I stumbled to the mirror. My face looked younger, softer. Before heartbreak etched lines across it. I checked everything. My messages, my bank account, the calendar. It was real. Somehow, impossibly, I had been given another chance. I laughed. Then I cried. Then I laughed again. Rebirth doesn't always come in a flash of light. Sometimes it comes quietly, cruelly, like a rewind button pressed by fate. But I understood one thing immediately. This time, Alan Ford would not climb on my back. This time, I wouldn't be his foundation. I'd be his reckoning. I started by pretending nothing had changed. I was still sweet, supportive, the perfect girlfriend. Alan couldn't tell the fire burning beneath my calm surface. I smiled, took notes, laughed at his jokes, but I watched everything. I recorded our conversations, documented every lie, every manipulation. I wanted evidence, not just revenge. At night, when he slept beside me, I built spreadsheets of his company's weaknesses, ran scenarios, planned exits. He never noticed. He was too busy dreaming aloud about world domination. Meanwhile, I quietly reached out to the one person he'd once mocked, Lucas Gray, a reclusive tech investor with a sharp mind and a soft heart. Alan had called him small time. I called him Plan A. Lucas agreed to meet. I didn't flirt. I just showed him numbers, logic, and a glimpse of what I could build on my own. He listened. He smiled. "You're smarter than him," he said. I agreed. Behind Alan's back, I started a consultancy using a fake name. Small clients at first, then bigger ones. I worked from cafes, libraries, even bathroom stalls at Alan's own events. The thrill of creation pulsed through me. For the first time, I wasn't building for someone else. I was building for me. Alan noticed I was distracted. I told him I was tired. He suggested I quit my job to focus on being supportive. I nodded and said I'd think about it. Meanwhile, my first contract landed. A retail app desperate for restructuring. Within 2 months, I doubled their revenue. Lucas introduced me to others. I never took credit publicly, but word of the fixer spread. Alan remained oblivious, caught in his reflection. And Cynthia? She'd started visiting more, all sugary smiles and probing questions. I fed her just enough to feel superior. She didn't know she was helping me set the stage. Alan always loved talking. So I listened. Every boast, every half-truth, every plan he wasn't qualified to execute. I let him believe he was educating me, mentoring me. Meanwhile, I was memorizing everything. When he asked me to help write a pitch for a major merger, I agreed, then deliberately included small errors. He didn't notice. The board did. They rejected the proposal, and Alan blamed his team, never suspecting me. His grip on the company wavered. Investors started asking questions. Cynthia accused staff of sabotage. I played the concerned girlfriend, holding his hand and saying, "You'll bounce back." He believed me. Arrogance was his fatal flaw. The same arrogance that once seduced me now blinded him. And the woman he once called ordinary, was orchestrating his downfall, one thread at a time. He had no idea that the ladder he climbed was already crumbling beneath his feet. I timed everything to align with the company's upcoming product launch. It was Alan's golden goose, a wearable AI assistant, and he bet everything on it, even taking out private loans to push production. I knew the flaws. I'd helped draft the specs and saw where he'd cut corners. The device overheated after extended use and had a dangerous data leak vulnerability. I sent the info, anonymously, to a tech blogger known for ripping apart faulty products. The review dropped 2 days before launch. Alan Ford's golden egg is rotten. The headline read, "Investors panicked. Pre-orders were canceled en masse." Alan tried to spin it, blaming the manufacturer. Then me. I denied everything and looked hurt. "How could you think I'd sabotage you?" I whispered, blinking back fake tears. He apologized. Cynthia scowled. And quietly, I bought up shares of his company's declining stock, using an alias through a shell firm Lucas helped me build. By the time Alan realized his empire was burning, I already held 23% of it. He called a crisis meeting, desperate to regain control. He raged at the board, at Cynthia, at junior staffers, anyone but himself. I watched silently from the gallery, pretending to be the supportive girlfriend. The vote didn't go his way. The board had lost confidence and demanded a temporary CEO. Alan stormed out, red-faced, screaming about betrayal. Cynthia followed, heels clicking furiously. 2 days later, the press leaked photos of them fighting in a parking lot. She slapped him. He grabbed her wrist. Cameras flashed. Social media exploded. I didn't gloat. I simply waited. When Lucas's team offered the board a rescue proposal, with my firm listed as the consultant, they accepted within the hour. I walked into Alan's office the next morning, dressed in white, smiling politely. "Hi," I said. "I believe this is mine now." Alan looked like a man waking from a coma. He stared at me, then the documents I slid across his desk. The acquisition had gone through. His shares were diluted. My firm, technically anonymous, held controlling interest. "You can't do this," he hissed. "You're nothing without me." I leaned in and whispered, "No, Alan, you were nothing without me. I just finally let you prove it." His mouth opened and closed like a fish. He didn't beg, he demanded, threatened. I stayed calm. "Your mistress already jumped ship. The media hates you. Your investors have a new favorite. And your product? Well, good luck fixing it without the one person who knew how." I turned to leave, then paused. "By the way, your new assistant's been feeding me updates for months. You should really vet your hires better." I didn't slam the door. I didn't need to. The silence behind me said enough. The aftermath was deliciously quiet. Alan tried to save face publicly, but his arrogance turned allies into enemies. Cynthia released a tell-all video, crying about being used by a narcissist. The public turned on him. Memes spread. Shares plummeted further. Meanwhile, my consultancy rebranded into a full-fledged firm. Lucas invested heavily, and together we began acquiring struggling tech ventures Alan had once scoffed at. Too niche, he'd said, but I saw gold in what he dismissed. Within 6 months, we'd flipped 3 companies for profit and built a 4th from scratch. I hired people Alan had fired. I mentored young women who reminded me of my past self. Every success was a balm, not for revenge anymore, but for healing. I still remembered the hurt, but it no longer ruled me. People called me sharp, visionary, but I never forgot. I was once the girl who brought Thai food to a trader. I kept one picture on my desk, not of Alan or Cynthia, but of myself, years ago, tired and worn out, standing at one of his launch events in a cheap dress I'd saved up to buy. That woman, she deserved better. Every decision I made now was for her. When people asked about Alan, I smiled and said, I wish him well. And I meant it. Let him live, let him struggle, let him find himself away from me. The man who used me as a step stool to climb had finally fallen hard, not because I pushed him, but because he never learned to stand without leaning. I, on the other hand, now stood tall on a foundation of scars and second chances. Rebirth didn't make me bitter. It made me precise. And when you've been burned to ashes, precision is the sharpest tool of all. A year later, Alan requested a meeting. I nearly declined, but curiosity won. He looked older, tired, worn. His voice had lost its edge. I've made mistakes, he said. I thought I was better than you. I was wrong. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for a job. I stared at him for a long time. The man who once erased me now needed my validation to survive. I admire your honesty, I said, but I don't think we'd be a good fit. He flinched. Why? Because I hire people who build, not those who steal credit. He nodded, eyes glassy. I walked him out myself. Outside, a young intern asked, "Who was that?" I paused. Just someone I used to know. As Alan disappeared into the crowd, I felt nothing. No hate. No triumph. Just peace. And that was the real victory. Not his fall, my freedom. Not long after, I was invited to speak at the same ballroom where Alan once received his award. This time, the applause was for me. I walked on stage in a sleek navy dress, heart steady, smile genuine. Success, I began, isn't about rising the fastest. It's about rising right. I shared my story, not with bitterness, but with clarity. The audience hung on every word. I saw tears, nods, clenched jaws. I saw women in the crowd who recognized themselves in my pain. When I stepped off stage, strangers embraced me. A young woman whispered, "You saved me." I realized then this wasn't just about revenge or business. It was about giving others what I'd once needed. Hope, proof that it's never too late to begin again. That night, I walked past the portrait of Alan, still hanging on the wall. I didn't tear it down. I didn't have to. I'd already replaced it. Cynthia tried to stage a comeback, launching her own startup using Alan's old contacts. But she lacked the grit, the vision. Her app crashed, both literally and figuratively. When she reached out to collaborate, I met her in a glass-walled cafe. Public, polite, professional. She wore desperation like perfume. "I've changed," she said. "We should work together." I sipped my espresso. "You betrayed me, then buried me beside him. Why would I share my sunlight now?" She blinked. "You're still angry." I shook my head. No, just finally honest. I paid the bill, left a generous tip, and walked away. I didn't look back. Some people think rebirth means reconciliation. It doesn't. Sometimes it means walking away from the ones who watched you drown and never threw a rope. Sometimes it means becoming the storm you once begged to pass. And Cynthia, she had weathered nothing. She hadn't earned the calm. I started writing a book, part memoir, part business manifesto. Publishers lined up. Lucas wrote the foreword. She taught me that the best revenge is success, but the rarest victory is peace. My story resonated because it wasn't neat. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was raw, earned, real. People called me resilient, inspiring. I simply called myself rebuilt. Every page I wrote was a stone laid in a new foundation, one no man could claim, no betrayal could shatter. And when the book hit bestseller lists, I didn't celebrate with champagne. I took a long walk, alone, under a full moon, and whispered thanks to the girl I used to be, the one who gave her all to someone who never deserved it. Without her pain, I'd never have known my strength. Without her loyalty, I'd never have learned discernment. She wasn't weak. She was simply early. And now, she was finally free. I didn't erase Alan from my history. I just stopped letting him define it. People often asked how I forgave. But the truth was, I didn't. I outgrew him. Like old skin, he peeled away, naturally. When I passed our old apartment building, the one where he first sweet-talked me into unpaid labor and dreams stitched with lies, I didn't flinch. I remembered the girl who cooked him late dinners while drafting his pitches. I honored her by living better, not bitter. There's a difference between revenge and reckoning. Revenge wants them to hurt. Reckoning wants them to understand. Alan's fall taught him nothing, but it taught the world something. Women who are underestimated don't vanish. They evolve. And sometimes they come back with sharper minds, stronger spines, and empires built on the ashes of silence. I didn't just survive Alan. I redefined what survival could look like, and I wore it well. Lucas and I never labeled ourselves. He was my friend first, then my fiercest ally. He never tried to save me. He stood beside me while I saved myself. One night, over late wine and silence thick with meaning, he said, "You don't owe me anything, you know?" I laughed softly. Good, because I've given enough away for free. He didn't ask for more, but I gave it anyway. A soft kiss, a lean into warmth I'd once feared. We didn't rush. We didn't pretend to be perfect, but we grew steady and honest. Where Alan had demanded my submission, Lucas respected my strength. Where Cynthia had mimicked me, Lucas amplified me. Together, we weren't a power couple. We were a quiet force. And sometimes that's more dangerous. Not flashy, not loud, but unshakable. Love didn't fix me. It reminded me that I was never broken, just bent in places men never cared to see. My team was mostly women, not by design, but by alignment. They came from every corner, some fresh out of school, others recovering from corporate burnout. I recognized the fire in their eyes. I nurtured it. Our office had no glass ceilings, no corner office thrones, just collaboration, clarity, and a shared promise. No one gets used to climb. The culture spread, attracting attention. Journalists called us the anti-Allen revolution. We laughed about it, but privately, it meant something. Every deal we closed, every pitch we perfected, was a tiny reclamation of what Allen tried to erase. People began asking me to mentor, to teach, to speak. But I always said the same thing. I'm not special. I'm just done being silent. In that honesty, I found power. And in that power, I found purpose. Alan built on my back. I built on my own. One was a house of cards. The other? Concrete. I received a wedding invitation from an old college friend, someone who once said, "Alan's lucky to have you." She had believed his charm, like I had. At the wedding, she pulled me aside. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I used to think you were too ambitious, too intense. Now I see you were just ahead of us." We clinked glasses. I danced. And when Alan's name came up in hushed gossip near the bar, something about bankruptcy, a lawsuit, I didn't lean in. I excused myself and watched the stars outside. They had always been there, even when I couldn't look up. That night, someone asked, "What made you so strong?" I smiled. I got tired of being small. The answer surprised even me, but it was true. I wasn't born powerful. I chose power the day I stopped asking permission to rise, and never apologized for the view. Eventually, Alan disappeared from headlines. He moved out of the city, tried consulting, even hosted a podcast that flopped after 5 episodes. His followers dwindled. His name faded. And still, I thrived. I bought a brownstone. Not flashy, but filled with light. I planted a garden. It was a mess of wildflowers and herbs, stubborn and untamed, just like me. When I watered it, I thought of all the times I'd poured into people who only took. Now I poured into soil, into myself, into those who gave back. Peace wasn't quiet. It was loud in its own way. It hummed in morning coffee, in meetings run by women, in laughter with Lucas. Alan had wanted glory. I had wanted truth. In the end, truth won. And glory? It followed truth like a shadow. You don't chase it. You become the kind of person it can't help but follow. Years passed. My book hit its 5th reprint. I was invited to judge innovation awards, even ones Alan once dominated. I almost declined, until I saw who the nominees were. One was a girl fresh out of college, pitching a product that Alan would have called cute, but pointless. She reminded me, hopeful, fiery, nervous in the spotlight. I voted for her. She won. When she cried in disbelief, I cried too, not because of her win, but because of what it symbolized. The world changing, the tides turning. She hugged me afterward and said, "You don't know how much you mean to us." But I did, because once upon a time, no one meant much to me, not even myself. Now I stood as proof. That pain doesn't last. That betrayal doesn't break you forever. And that sometimes being used only makes you more valuable once you reclaim yourself. One afternoon, Lucas found an old photo of Alan and me in a dusty drawer. He held it up with a raised brow. "Keep it?" I shook my head. "Burn it." He nodded. But instead of a fireplace, I shredded it, piece by piece, then smiled. "Feels better," I said. That night, I lit a candle, not for Alan, but for closure. Letting go wasn't a single moment. It was dozens of small ones, stacked like bricks. Some days, I remembered the worst things he said. Other days, I remembered how I used to love him. But the difference was, neither ruled me. Memory without pain is a gift. It's how you know you've healed. And in that space, I could finally make room for joy, for rest, for whatever came next. Alan had been a chapter, but my story, it was still being written, and the pen was finally in my hand. Some asked why I never sued Alan for damages or credit. The truth? I didn't need to. I had already taken back everything that mattered. My name, my voice, my dignity. I didn't want courtrooms. I wanted clarity. Besides, what could money buy that I didn't already have? Peace? Love? No, those were earned. And earned they were. Still, on tough days, I'd reread the email thread where Alan dismissed my app idea as a hobby. The same app that now brought in 7 figures a quarter. I'd smile and close the laptop, not out of spite, but pride. People like Alan taught me what not to become. And in some twisted way, I was grateful, because without his betrayal, I might still be building castles for someone else. Instead, I was building kingdoms of my own. And this time, they had my name etched in every single stone. The biggest irony was that Alan never saw the real me, even when I was his foundation. He saw utility, not humanity. A ladder, not a partner. But that blindness became my weapon. While he chased spotlights, I mastered shadows. While he craved credit, I studied leverage. While he shouted, I listened. And in silence, I learned how to roar. It wasn't about being ruthless. It was about refusing to be erased. I didn't win because I destroyed him. I won because I reclaimed myself step by step, wound by wound. That's the story I told every time I was asked, how did you do it? And my answer never changed. I stopped shrinking for people who couldn't see my worth. I stopped loving people who only loved my usefulness. And I stopped forgiving those who made me hate myself to keep them comfortable. That was my turning point. That was my rebirth. One winter morning, a journalism student requested to interview me for her thesis on women in tech. She sat across from me, recorder trembling in her hand, and asked, "What advice would you give someone who's just been betrayed?" I paused, choosing each word carefully. Grieve it. Feel every shard. But then build. Build something so true, so yours that no one can ever take it away again. Her eyes welled up, and I knew she wasn't just writing a paper. She was living it. After she left, I stared out the window, snow falling softly on the garden. Betrayal never stops hurting. It just loses its power, especially when you reclaim your story. Alan took years from me, but he gave me this, the fire to rise, to rebuild, to remember who I was before him and who I became because of him. And that, in the end, was priceless. There was a time I believed closure came from the other person. The apology, the confession that I was wrong. But after Alan, I understood. Closure isn't given. It's chosen. He never said sorry, never admitted the lies, the manipulation. The way he made me feel like success only existed through him. And still, I closed that door. Firmly. Without drama. Without rage. Just finality. I didn't need his words to validate my pain. I already knew what I survived. And I didn't need revenge to feel whole. My life now was enough. More than enough. When I walked into meetings as a keynote speaker, I wore red, not as a symbol of anger, but power. The same red Alan once said made me look too aggressive. Funny, that same red now made people lean in when I spoke. Closure wasn't about him. It was about me. And I chose it fully and finally. Sometimes I imagined what Alan thought when he saw my face in a Forbes article or a conference he wasn't invited to. Did he scoff, regret, or did he lie to himself, claiming he helped shape me? Let him think whatever he needed. I didn't live for his understanding anymore. Still, I couldn't deny the poetic symmetry. He used me as a rung on his ladder. I used his betrayal as the foundation of my empire. We both climbed, but only one of us kept rising. I no longer avoided his name. In interviews, when asked about my early career, I referenced him plainly. I was once the woman behind the man. Now I'm the woman in front of her own legacy. People called it empowering, but to me, it was just truth. Not a punchline, not a headline, just the arc of a woman who learned never to hand over her crown again. Lucas never asked about Alan. He didn't need to. He saw the scars and loved me anyway. He never tried to replace the past. He simply held space for the future. That mattered more than I could explain. Once I joked, "What if Alan tries to crawl back?" Lucas only smiled. "Then he'll find a woman who doesn't crawl." That night, I realized I'd found something rarer than love. I'd found respect. Alan had demanded my light while keeping me in his shadow. Lucas simply let me shine. He never flinched when I won awards or made more than him. He clapped the loudest. Our relationship wasn't built on performance or power games. It was built on mutual admiration. And while Alan had once said, "No man wants a woman who outshines him," Lucas proved that real men don't fear bright women. They fall in love with their brilliance and never try to dim it. There was a podcast episode one recorded, one that went viral unexpectedly. I told the full story, not naming Alan, but sharing the betrayal, the burnout, the rebirth. Listeners flooded in. Messages poured through. Women, men, even teens saying, "You put words to something I couldn't explain." That was when I knew this wasn't just my story. It was ours. A collective rising. A shared exhaustion with being used, underestimated, silenced. I didn't just want to be an example. I wanted to be a mirror, showing people their own power. Alan taught me how cruel people could be when they think you're disposable. But my healing showed me something more powerful. How strong you become when you stop being convenient and start being complete. My voice, once quiet and careful, was now clear and unapologetic. And that clarity echoed far beyond me. It became a movement. And movements, unlike men like Alan, don't fade. Years later, a young founder stood on a stage accepting her first innovation grant. She held up the plaque and said, "I'm here because someone paved the way without ever asking for applause." I was in the audience, tears pricking my eyes. She didn't say my name. She didn't need to. Legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about who stands taller because you stood first. Alan had wanted monuments. I built bridges, and in those bridges, others walked freely, bravely, unapologetically. The fall he suffered was no longer mine to narrate. It was background noise to a story much bigger than him. My revenge wasn't fire. It was growth. Quiet, persistent, unstoppable. I didn't destroy him. I simply outgrew the version of me that needed him. That was the most devastating ending for men like Alan, being forgotten by the woman they once believed couldn't live without them. And living well without them, that was everything. I no longer walked into rooms wondering if I belonged. I designed the rooms, the chairs, the rules. I'd been excluded before, by Alan, by institutions, by self-doubt. Now, I invited others in, especially the underestimated, the misfit, the overlooked. I gave them space, budgets, mentors. I showed them how to lead without apology. Alan used to say leadership was about dominance. I now knew it was about service, creating safety, making sure no one had to prove their worth in exchange for dignity. And if that made me soft, so be it. Empathy wasn't weakness. It was strategy. It kept us human while we built machines. Alan had failed because he built for himself. I succeeded because I built for something bigger. And in doing so, I finally understood the real win. It wasn't just about rising. It was about reaching back, so no one else had to start in the shadows like I did. One day, I passed a bookstore downtown and saw my face in the window, framed by the title, Burnt Bridges, Bloomed Gardens. My memoir. I stepped inside, heart pounding. A girl in line for signing clutched her copy like it was armor. She whispered, "You helped me leave someone like him." I signed the cover, met her eyes, and said, "You helped yourself. I just reminded you how." That's the truth of it all. We don't save each other. We remind one another that we were never powerless, just told we were. I didn't become a hero. I just stopped playing the victim in someone else's story. Alan's rise wasn't mine to envy. His fall wasn't mine to orchestrate. I made peace with both. And in that peace, I found something better than revenge, better than fame. I found myself whole, unshaken, and finally, unafraid to be seen in full bloom. Alan never learned to apologize. I finally stopped needing him to. I had written my final chapter on him long ago. Now I was writing new ones filled with hope, love, and fire. Sometimes I caught my reflection and thought, she's the woman Alan tried to keep small. Other times, I didn't think of him at all. And that was the real victory. Living a life so full, he became irrelevant, not erased, just unimportant. Lucas would catch me staring into space and ask, "Plotting your next empire?" I'd grin, always, because this was just the beginning. Every setback had forged a sharper edge, a deeper truth, and I was no longer afraid to wield both. Let Alan keep his excuses. I had stories to tell, bridges to build, hands to hold. I had a life now. And I wasn't climbing anymore, I was flying. A journalist once asked me, if you could go back in time, would you stop yourself from meeting Alan? I thought about it. The years I lost, the sleepless nights, the humiliation. And then I smiled. No, I said, because I wouldn't be this woman without that fire. Pain taught me boundaries. Betrayal taught me clarity. And being discarded taught me value, mine, not measured by anyone's standards, certainly not Alan's. If I hadn't fallen, I wouldn't have learned how to rise. Stronger, smarter, wilder. I owe him nothing, but I thank the experience, because when you survive someone like Alan, you learn how to never hand yourself over again. Not to a lover, not to fear, not to doubt. You become your own home. I wasn't just reborn. I rebuilt. From ashes? Yes, but also from choice. And in that choice, I finally understood. Being used wasn't my end. It was the catalyst for my beginning. Alan tried to contact me once through an assistant. A vague message. Alan wants to talk. He says it's important. I didn't reply, not because I was angry. I just didn't care anymore. That was the true mark of freedom, not needing to revisit what broke me. People like Alan believe they're owed an audience, an ending, a second chance. But some doors, once closed, stay that way. My silence wasn't revenge. It was self-respect. I didn't need to hear his voice to know who I was. I'd carved a life so full, so rich, that his presence would only subtract. So I let the message sit in my inbox, unread, not as a power play, but as a quiet declaration. I choose peace. I choose progress. And I choose me. Because the real tragedy for men like Alan isn't being hated. It's being irrelevant to the woman they once thought they owned. That same year, a gala invited me as their keynote speaker. It was hosted in the very venue where Alan once won an award I helped him earn back when I was the plus one, not even mentioned in the credits. I walked in this time as the guest of honor. Heads turned, cameras flashed, and I stood on that stage, looking out at an audience that now saw me. Really saw me. I didn't speak about Alan. I didn't need to. I spoke about reinvention, about turning betrayals into building blocks, about knowing your worth so deeply no one can make you question it again. Afterward, a woman hugged me and whispered, "I almost stayed with my Alan. Not anymore." That night wasn't about revenge. It was about redemption. I took back the place where I once stood in someone else's shadow. And in doing so, I left behind every version of me that ever settled. There was a day when I found an old box, letters Alan had written back when he was still pretending to love me. Empty words, promises that never saw daylight. I could have burned them, but I didn't. I kept one, framed it, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder, never again. Never again would I fall for potential over proof, charm over character. That letter sat on my desk as I signed deals, hired teams, mentored women. It was a relic of who I used to be, soft-spoken, eager to be chosen. Now, I chose myself. Over and over. Alan's letter became a fossil, not a wound, not a weakness, just evidence of how far I'd come. I didn't need to forget the past to move on from it. I just needed to stop letting it define me. That letter didn't haunt me. It honored me, because the girl who received it, she didn't vanish. She evolved. Sometimes people ask if I miss him. Not Alan specifically, but the illusion, the comfort of believing someone else had the answers, the warmth of shared dreams. And I'm honest. I miss the version of love I thought we had, but not him. He was a placeholder, a warning sign, and I listened too late. Still, that longing taught me something profound. Real love doesn't make you smaller. It doesn't confuse pain for passion or silence for strength. Real love doesn't use you as a stepping stone and call it partnership. So yes, I miss what I imagined, but I'm grateful I woke up, because now I don't chase dreams that require self-abandonment. I don't mistake manipulation for intensity. I know better. I love better. And the woman I've become, she's the kind of person my younger self needed to meet long before Alan. But I met her in time, just in time. The company I built was called Emberize, a nod to the fire I walked through and the way I rose anyway. At our 5-year anniversary, we launched a scholarship for women escaping toxic partnerships, giving them the chance to study, to rebuild, to breathe. I stood on that stage, holding hands with survivors. Their stories were different, but the ache was familiar. And I realized this wasn't just about business anymore. It was about breaking generational cycles, about giving women a hand up instead of a pat on the head. Alan had once told me, "You're too emotional to run something big." But that emotion built an empire. Empathy was my currency, strategy my backbone, and every decision I made was one Alan could never fathom, because it wasn't about control. It was about legacy, and my legacy wouldn't be about climbing over others. It would be about lifting them, just like I learned to lift myself. I ran into Alan again, unexpectedly, a networking event. He looked older, heavier. The room didn't orbit him the way it used to. He noticed me, walked over, forced a smile. "You've done well," he said, as if surprised. I smiled back, calm. "Yes, I have." There was no warmth in his eyes, only the residue of entitlement. Maybe we could catch up sometime, he offered. I laughed. Gently, not cruelly. There's nothing left to catch. He blinked, confused. Men like him don't understand women who've healed. I didn't gloat. I didn't sting. I just excused myself and walked away. That moment wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, ordinary, but inside me, something settled. Alan was no longer a chapter, not even a footnote, just a name I once knew. The woman who once needed his approval was gone, and in her place stood someone even he didn't recognize, someone he could never reach again. That night, Lucas poured me a glass of wine and asked, "Was it hard?" I nodded, but not in the way I thought. It wasn't hard to see him. It was hard to feel nothing. Lucas understood. He didn't press. He simply held my hand. And I realized love isn't about fixing the broken parts. It's about being witnessed while you piece yourself back together. Lucas saw every fracture in me and never asked me to hide them. That was love. That was safety. Alan had once said he loved me too much to let me go. Lucas never tried to keep me. He gave me the freedom to stay. And I did. Because when you finally love someone who doesn't fear your power, you stop apologizing for it. You start growing into it. Alan saw my strength as competition. Lucas saw it as beautiful. And so did I. Finally, one morning, I received a message from a woman named Elise. She said, "I think he's using me the way he used you. Can we talk?" My chest tightened, not because of fear, but recognition. I called her. We spoke for hours. She cried. I listened. She asked if she was crazy. I told her no. She asked how I left. I told her the truth, first emotionally, then physically, step by shaky step. Elise reminded me of who I used to be, and in helping her, I healed more of myself. That's the thing about survival. It becomes contagious. You show someone the way out, and they carry the torch forward. I didn't save Elise. I just stood beside her until she saved herself. Alan had created a pattern, but I was part of the break. That was the real victory. Not revenge, not karma, just a better ending for the next woman. The foundation started quietly. A few legal volunteers, some therapists, a rented office space. We called it Second Wind. It grew faster than I ever imagined. Stories poured in, women from every background, age, race. Some had left. Others were still stuck. We didn't judge. We offered lifelines. Alan's name occasionally came up, in whispers, from others he'd manipulated. I didn't flinch anymore. I didn't feel rage. I felt focus. Each story sharpened my mission. I didn't need to dismantle Alan's world. I just needed to build one where women, like me, didn't feel alone. That was the ultimate power. Not punishing the past, but rewriting the future. The irony? Alan still probably thinks this is all about him. He'll never understand. Because you can't see the view from the summit when you're too obsessed with dragging people off the ledge. I didn't fall. I flew, and I took others with me. Lucas proposed under a quiet sunset. No audience, no spectacle. Just him, me, and the life we built. I didn't cry out of surprise. I cried out of peace. He didn't ask for ownership. He asked for partnership. And I said yes, not because I needed him, but because I chose him. We married in a garden I planted myself. No extravagant guest list, no gossip magazines. Just love. Pure, slow-burning, resilient. My daughter from a previous relationship walked me down the aisle. I'd once worried she'd grow up seeing her mother as broken, but now she looked at me with pride. That mattered more than any revenge could. I didn't teach her that women must suffer for love. I taught her they could walk away from what doesn't serve them. Alan's story was over, and mine, it was blooming, chapter by chapter, with no room left for parasites. Occasionally, I still see Alan's name in industry news. A startup he tried to launch failed within a year. A scandal involving financial misreporting broke soon after. He was being investigated. Part of me wanted to feel something, relief, triumph, but I didn't. I felt distant, like I was watching a movie I used to care about. Once upon a time, I would have screamed, "Justice!" Now, I just turned the page. Alan crumbled not because I destroyed him, but because he built his life on borrowed stones. My effort, my trust, my labor. When you climb using stolen scaffolding, eventually the structure gives out. He wasn't built to last. I was. His fall wasn't my design. It was the gravity of his own actions. That's what people forget. Sometimes the best revenge is survival. Sometimes it's silence. And sometimes it's simply living a life so good they no longer exist in it. At our 10-year gala, I stood at the podium again, this time with hundreds of women beside me. Survivors, leaders, fighters. The room buzzed with energy, hope, and strength. I didn't mention Alan. I didn't need to. My life now was the loudest answer to every insult he ever hurled. That night, a young intern approached me, shy and starry-eyed. "How do you stay so strong?" she asked. I smiled, remembering the woman who once asked that same question with trembling lips and tear-soaked cheeks. I stopped giving my power away. I told her, and I started believing I was worth the fight. That was the truth. Not magic, not luck, just choice. Consistent, radical choice. To walk away, to rebuild, to believe. I wasn't the exception. I was the blueprint. The fire didn't break me. It baptized me. And from those flames, I emerged untouchable. My mother once told me, when someone shows you who they are, don't try to repaint them. I didn't understand it then. I do now. I spent years redrawing Alan's silhouette, trying to color in virtues that weren't there. But the truth always bleeds through. Now, I don't hold paintbrushes for anyone but myself. I don't excuse red flags. I don't explain away cruelty. People show you who they are. And if you're brave, you believe them the first time. Alan showed me who he was. And eventually, I showed him who I became. I stopped chasing closure. I built it. I stopped asking, why me? And started asking, what's next? That shift saved me. Women don't need to be burned to rise. But when we are, we carry embers in our bones. We light the way for others. And we never again let someone climb by standing on our backs. I revisited the house Alan and I once shared. It had long been sold, forgotten. But I stood outside for a moment, remembering, not with sorrow, but reverence. That house held my lowest days, me curled in corners, begging for love that should have been given freely. But it also held my awakening. The night I packed a bag with trembling hands. The morning I walked out, that house watched me break and watched me decide I wouldn't stay broken. I didn't need to go inside. The woman I am now would never enter that place again. She had outgrown it, outgrown the silence, the settling, the self-doubt. I whispered a quiet goodbye, not to the house, but to the woman who once lived in it. She fought so I could fly, and because of her, I soar. That chapter is over, but the strength it gave me, that will echo forever. I used to dread birthdays, each one felt like a reminder of time wasted. Now, I celebrate them with joy. Not because life is perfect, but because it's mine. Fully, fiercely mine. Each year, I toast not to age, but to rebirth, to lessons learned, to scars healed, to laughter returned. Alan stole time from me, yes, but I reclaimed every minute, not in one grand moment, but in thousands of small ones. Waking without fear, smiling without pretending, loving without shrinking. I no longer measure success by money or applause. I measure it by peace, by mornings where I don't cry in secret, by nights where I fall asleep beside someone who knows me and stays anyway. That's the life I fought for. That's the woman I became, not despite what happened, but because I refused to let it be the end of me. Reborn doesn't mean new. It means true. People always assume revenge is dramatic, a grand takedown, a public reckoning. But my revenge was quiet. It was every time I chose dignity over drama, every time I didn't text back, every time I didn't explain myself, every time I chose to love again. Not recklessly, but wisely. My revenge was letting Alan fade into the background, while I stepped fully into the light. I didn't destroy him. He did that on his own. All I did was remove the scaffolding and stop holding him up. That's the kind of revenge no one can undo. It's not about winning. It's about leaving the game entirely. I don't play by his rules. I don't live in his world. And when I walk into a room now, it's not to be noticed by men like him. It's to lead, to uplift, to shine. That's the kind of power he'll never understand. Years later, Alan reached out again, this time through a mutual acquaintance. He was struggling, financially, emotionally, maybe both. They said he wanted to apologize, that he'd changed. I smiled gently. Tell him I wish him healing. That was all. No meetings, no callbacks, just closure on my terms, not because he deserved it, but because I did. Carrying anger would have meant he still mattered. He didn't. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone back in. It's about letting yourself move on. Alan was a lesson, a hard one, but one I passed with grace, with grit, and now I don't need to shout my freedom. I wear it in my posture, my purpose, my peace. That's what real closure looks like. Not a door slammed, but a door quietly locked behind you as you step into the sunlight of a life you chose, a life that no longer includes the man who tried to bury you. The greatest surprise in all of this wasn't Alan's betrayal. It was my capacity to rebuild, to feel again, to love, not just others, but myself. That was the real redemption arc. Not proving him wrong, but proving myself right. Right to leave, right to rise, right to want more. So many women stay because they think leaving is failure. But I left and I won. Not in applause, but in authenticity. Not in revenge, but in rebirth. I don't need everyone to know my story. I just need women like me to hear it, to know it's possible, that the pit isn't the end, that buried things can bloom, and broken wings can fly. My voice, once silenced, now roars in boardrooms, bedrooms, and beneath my breath when I look in the mirror. I climbed no ladder. I built one, and every rung was forged in fire and climbed with love. Now, when I hold my daughter's hand, I don't feel shame. I feel legacy. She won't need to unlearn what I had to. She won't mistake endurance for love. She'll know that softness and strength are not enemies. She'll speak with a voice I helped protect. That is the true full circle, not Alan's downfall, but her rise. I didn't rewrite my story just for me. I did it so she'd grow up with a different definition of worth. not given by a man, but lived from within. That's how the cycle ends. Not with fire, but with light. I used to think surviving Alan was the point, but it wasn't. Thriving after him, that's the legacy. That's the freedom. And every time my daughter laughs, every time I breathe without fear, I remember he may have climbed to the top using me, but I made sure he fell, and I never stopped rising